I'm Charles, and at 75 I discovered that the best company I could have was myself. It wasn't always like this, you know. When I retired from the factory where I worked for 40 years as a supervisor, I felt an enormous void. My routine, which was once so busy, suddenly became silent. At first, this scared me a lot. I remember the day I sat on my porch having breakfast alone. My wife Sarah had passed away 2 years before, and realized I no longer knew who I was without my work, without my companion. It was a difficult moment, but it was also the beginning of a great discovery. With time I improved. I learned about different types of wood, finishing techniques, how to use tools correctly. Each project was a new challenge. I made a coffee table for Amy, my daughter. She was so touched that she cried. "Dad, you have a gift," she said. "I don't know if it's a gift, but I know that each piece I make has a part of my story. The most interesting thing is how this hobby changed my relationship with time. Before, the days seemed to drag on. Now they fly by. I wake up early, have my coffee, tend to the garden, and then go to my workshop. There, time passes differently. Sometimes I find myself working on a piece, and before I know it, it's lunchtime. One of the most rewarding things was when I started making wooden toys for my great-grandchildren. Cars, small animals, dollhouses. Seeing their little eyes light up when receiving a toy made by their great-grandfather. There's no money that can buy that feeling. The other day, I was sanding a piece and realized how woodworking is similar to life. You need to have patience, respect the time of each step, accept that sometimes things don't turn out as planned. When a piece doesn't turn out good, I don't give up. I transform it into something else, adapt the project. I learned that mistakes sometimes lead us to even more interesting paths. John, my neighbor, started showing up to see my work. I ended up teaching him some basic techniques. Now, twice a week we meet in the basement to work on projects together. It's different from the silent solitude I had before. It's a shared silence, broken only by the sound of tools and some stories we tell each other. I discovered that creativity has no age. It was there, dormant inside me, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Solitude, which many fear, was actually my companion in this discovery. It was in the silence of my days that I found this new passion, this new purpose. You know, when you spend so much time alone, your mind starts to work in a different way. In my little woodworking corner, while I sand a piece of wood or measure pieces for a new project, thoughts flow in a way I never imagined possible. I remember a specific day I was working on restoring an old dresser I found. As I removed layer after layer of old varnish, I began to think about how we are similar to that piece of furniture. Every experience we live is like a layer that accumulates in us. Some are beautiful, others not so much, but they all become part of who we are. My little room in the basement became a kind of temple of reflection. There, among sawdust and tools, I began to better understand the things of life. For example, I realized that I had always been in too much of a hurry. I wanted my children to grow up quickly, for the weekend to arrive fast, for retirement to come soon. Now I see how each moment is precious precisely because it's fleeting. Sometimes I catch myself looking out the small basement window, observing the birds that come to visit my garden. I find myself thinking about how they live in the present, without worrying about tomorrow. The other day I saw a pair of robins building a nest. It made me think about how Sarah and I built our life together, brick by brick, dream by dream. I have an old notebook where I write down these thoughts. At first they were just loose ideas, but over time they turned into deeper reflections. I write about the changes I see in the world, about the stories my grandchildren tell me, about the memories I keep from my childhood. It's as if each thought were a piece of wood that I'm shaping until it makes sense. One of the things I think about most is time. Not clock time, but this time we feel inside us, how it seems to run when we're happy and drag when we're sad. How some moments from 50 years ago seem to have happened yesterday, while others from last week already seem so distant. The other day, my oldest son, Robert, came to visit and found my reflection notebook. He read a few pages and was surprised. "Dad, you should share this with more people." But you know, I don't write thinking about an audience. I write because it helps organize what I feel to better understand the world around me. In fact, I don't think I've ever thought so much about life as I do now. When I was younger, I was always running, always doing something. Now I have time to stop and really reflect on things. About love, about loss, about the joy of seeing a grandchild grow, about the mystery that is life. Sometimes I find myself philosophizing about small things, how the sound of rain on the roof seems like an old song, how the smell of coffee in the morning brings memories of my parents' house, how a hug can say more than 1,000 words. These are simple thoughts, but they carry deep truths. You know, one of the hardest things I faced was the first Christmas after Sarah passed away. There was that tree we always decorated together, the recipes she used to make, her empty chair at the table. I thought I wouldn't be able to bear it, but that's when I discovered a strength I didn't know existed in me. On that Christmas night, instead of giving in to sadness, I decided to do something different. I went to my workshop and started making small wooden ornaments for the tree. In each piece I carved, I put a happy memory of our Christmases together. Was it painful? Yes. But it was also liberating. I realized I could transform pain into something beautiful. Emotional strength is a funny thing. It doesn't come suddenly like lightning. It's more like a tree that grows slowly with deep roots. Each day alone, each challenge overcome, each moment of longing faced, all of this was strengthening me, little by little. I remember an afternoon when I was in the garden, tending to Sarah's roses, and a strong storm began. Instead of going inside, I stayed there, feeling the rain, seeing how the flowers bent with the wind but didn't break. I identified with them at that moment. We need to learn to bend with the storms of life, without letting them break us. One of the most important discoveries was learning to deal with my emotions without fear. Before, when sadness came, I tried to run from it. I'd turn the TV up loud, look for something to do, anything not to feel. Now when it comes, I welcome it like an old acquaintance. I sit in my armchair, take my notebook, and let the tears flow if I need to. I developed some rituals that help me on difficult days. In the morning, I have my coffee watching the sunrise. In the afternoon, I work in the wood shop. At night, before going to sleep, I write down 3 good things that happened during the day. Even on bad days, there's always something good to note. These are simple things, but they help me maintain emotional balance. The neighbors sometimes comment on how I seem stronger now. It's not that I don't feel pain or longing anymore. I do, and a lot. The difference is that I've learned to live with these feelings. It's like those pieces of wood I work with. Sometimes I find knots that are difficult to deal with, but instead of trying to remove them by force, I learn to work with them, incorporate them into the final design. The other day, my granddaughter went through a difficult breakup. She came to me crying. In other times, I would have tried to minimize her pain or given hasty advice. Instead, I just sat beside her, offered her some hot chocolate, and let her talk. Sometimes the greatest strength is in knowing how to be present for others in their moments of fragility. Age has taught me that being strong doesn't mean not feeling fear or sadness. It means facing these feelings with courage and gentleness towards oneself. As I always say, we're not stone. We're more like trees, flexible, growing through adversity, with deep roots that keep us firm, even in the strongest winds. It's funny how life comes full circle. When I was younger, I always thought happiness was in the big achievements. The new car, the promotion at work, the expensive trips. Today, at 75, I've discovered that true joy is hidden in the simplest things of everyday life. It all started on an ordinary morning. Shortly after I began living alone, I was having my coffee on the porch, as I always did, when a hummingbird appeared in the garden. I stood there, still, observing that small creature dancing among the flowers. For a few minutes, I forgot everything. The problems, the worries, the loneliness. That's when I realized there was so much beauty around me that I had never noticed before. After that day, I started paying more attention to everything. The smell of freshly brewed coffee early in the morning, which reminds me of my mother. The sound of rain on the roof, which sounds like an old song. The colors of the sky at sunset, different every day. These are things that were always there, but I was too busy to notice. I created a ritual for myself. Every morning after coffee, I take a walk around the garden. I observe each new flower that has bloomed, each leaf that has changed color. Sometimes I spend almost an hour just doing this. My children joke that I've become a contemplative old man. But you know what? It's true, and how good it is that I have. In my woodworking shop, I learned to appreciate the smell of each type of wood, the different textures under my fingers. There are days when I just admire the wood grain, as if they were maps telling ancient stories. Sarah always said I was too hasty, always wanting to see everything finished quickly. Now I understand what she meant about enjoying the process. One of the greatest joys I discovered was cooking for myself. Not that I'm a great chef, far from it. But there's something special about carefully choosing the ingredients, preparing everything at my own pace. The other day, I made beans that tasted just like my mother used to make. I sat down to eat and cried with emotion, but it was a good cry, you know? Visits from my grandchildren gained another meaning too. Before, I always wanted to take them out, buy presents, make big plans. Now our best afternoons are those when we stay in the backyard, telling stories, watching the ants work, or doing small projects in the woodshop. The sparkle in their eyes when we finish making a wooden car together is worth more than any expensive toy. I learned to be grateful for every little thing, for the sun that comes through the window in the morning, for the warm bread from the bakery, for a friend's phone call, for the body that still allows me to do what I like. These are such simple blessings that used to go unnoticed in the rush of daily life. You know what's most interesting? The more I thank for the little things, the more reasons to be thankful seem to appear. It's as if life wanted to show us that happiness isn't in the big events, but in the small moments that fill our days. As the years passed, I realized that the more I got to know myself, the easier it became to understand others. It's as if all that reflection and time alone had given me a kind of special glasses to see into people's hearts. I remember well the day when this change became clear to me. I was at Joe's small market, here near home, when I saw Mrs. Martha, a lady who had always been known in the neighborhood for being grumpy. She was arguing with the cashier over a few cents. Years ago, I would have been irritated by that scene, but that day something was different. I saw something in her eyes that I recognized: loneliness. Later, I found out that she had recently lost her husband, just as I had lost Sarah. I approached her slowly, commented on the high price of things, and gradually we started talking. Today, Mrs. Martha is a great friend. Sometimes she comes over for coffee and we laugh remembering that day at the market. In the woodshop, I started making small gifts for people. Not expensive or elaborate gifts, but simple things with meaning. For Joe from the market, I made a key holder when I noticed he was always losing the keys to his establishment. For the pet shop owner, a small engraved plaque with the name of the shop. These are small gestures, but they come from observing and understanding the needs of others. One of the most beautiful things I learned was to truly listen. Not just hear, but listen with the heart. When my grandson Peter came to tell me he was having problems at school, I didn't rush to give advice as I used to. I just sat with him on the porch, let him talk, and paid attention not only to the words, but to the silences between them. Thursdays became a special day here at home. Some neighbors started showing up for an afternoon coffee. It's nothing formal. Everyone brings something to share. But the most important thing isn't the food. It's the sharing of stories, concerns, joys. I've become a kind of neighborhood confessor, you know. People seem to feel comfortable opening their hearts to me. I learned that each person carries their own story of pain and overcoming. John, my neighbor who now also does woodworking with me, lost a child years ago. He never talked about it until the day we were working together, and the shared silence created space for him to open up. I didn't say much that day, just put my hand on his shoulder. Sometimes touch says more than words. It's funny how life teaches us. The older I get, the more I realize that understanding others is a gift that develops over time, with experiences, with the stumbles that life gives us. It's like working with wood. It takes patience, care, and most importantly, respect for each one's time. It's curious how life teaches us important lessons in unexpected moments. I learned about limits on a Sunday afternoon when I was exhausted after spending the entire day helping 3 different neighbors move. I could barely stand, my back hurt. But even so, I said yes when Mrs. Clare asked for help to change her curtains. That night, lying in bed with a backache that wouldn't let me sleep, I had a serious conversation with myself. I realized I was repeating old patterns, wanting to please everyone, even if it cost my well-being. Sarah always warned me about this. "Charles," she would say, "you don't need to carry the world on your shoulders." That's when I started to develop what I call the conscious yes policy. Before accepting any request, I started asking myself 3 questions. Do I have the energy for this? Will this do me good? Can I help without harming myself? If the answer is no to any of these questions, I learned to refuse politely. At first, it wasn't easy. When Mrs. Clare came to ask for help again, I took a deep breath and said, "I can't today, but I know a young man who does this kind of service very well." I was surprised when she smiled and said she understood perfectly. That's when I realized that people respect those who know their limits more. I created a routine that helps me maintain balance. Mornings are just for me. It's when I take care of the garden, do my light exercises and meditate a little. I usually reserve afternoons for woodworking and receiving visitors, but not every day. I established that Wednesday is my day of complete rest, without visits or commitments. With my children, I also learned to be more direct. I love when they come to visit with the grandkids, but sometimes I need silence and solitude. Before, I was afraid of hurting them if I asked for space, but one day I gathered the courage and explained how I felt. To my surprise, they understood perfectly and even started to respect me more for it. In the woodshop, I put up a small board with my hours. When someone shows up outside of hours, I just point to it and smile. People got used to it. Some neighbors even joke, "Mr. Charles now has a doctor's schedule." And why not? Our time is precious at any age. One of the most important things I learned was that saying no to some things means saying yes to myself. When I refuse an invitation to an event that I know will leave me tired, I'm saying yes to my health. When I don't accept to do a job that's beyond my strength, I'm saying yes to my well-being. The most interesting thing is that the more I learn to respect my limits, the more people seem to respect me too. It's as if by taking care of myself, I was teaching others to do the same. Mrs. Martha, the one I met at the market, told me the other day, "Mr. Charles, I learned from you that I don't need to say yes to everything." And so, at 75, I realized that my life has transformed in a way I never imagined. What started as a solitary journey after Sarah's passing has become an adventure rich in discoveries and true connections. Today, my house is no longer just a place of memories, but a living space of encounters and affections. Thursdays continue to be special days, with the afternoon coffee that brings friends together. The smell of wood from the workshop mixes with the aroma of cake in the oven, and laughter echoes through the backyard where Sarah's roses continue to bloom. My children notice the difference. Amy told me the other day, "Dad, you're more alive than ever." And it's true. Each piece I make in the woodshop, each deep conversation I have with friends, each moment of silence in the garden, everything has a special meaning now. John, my woodworking companion, says our friendship is different from any he's ever had. "It's because we're not in a hurry," he says. "We know how to wait for the right moment, like wood that needs the right time to be worked." My relationships with my grandchildren have deepened in a unique way. They no longer come here just to visit Grandpa. They come to learn, share, grow together. Peter, who used to only care about video games, now spends hours with me in the workshop, learning the secrets of wood and, without realizing it, of life. And you know what's most beautiful? I discovered that it's never too late to build new bonds. Mrs. Martha, John, Mr. Joseph from the market, each of them brought a different color to my life. These are friendships that were born out of authenticity, mutual respect, the ability to share both moments of joy and sadness. Sarah always said that life was like a patchwork quilt. Each piece tells a story, and together they form something bigger and more beautiful. Today I understand perfectly what she meant. My life has become that colorful quilt, made of simple moments, true friendships, and daily discoveries. And so I end my story, not with a full stop, but with an ellipsis, because each day is a new blank page, a new chance to learn, to love, to live. As I always tell my grandchildren, life never stops surprising us. We just need to be open-hearted to receive what it has to give us. And here, sitting on my porch, watching the sun set as I write these last lines in my notebook, I feel a deep gratitude. Gratitude for every moment lived, every person who crossed my path, every lesson learned. Because in the end, it's not the years in our life that matter, but the life in our years.